Bulletin and welcome to this special weather update. A hurricane warning remains in force for Yasawa and Mamanuca group and is now in force for western parts of Viti Levu and nearby smaller islands. A storm warning remains in force for the Mboa province and interior of Viti Levu. A gale warning remains in force for Dikumbia, Tavyuni, the rest of Vanua Levu and nearby smaller islands, Northern Lau and Lomai Viti group, the rest of Viti Levu and nearby smaller islands, Kandavu, Benga, Vatulele and nearby smaller islands. A strong wind warning remains in force for the rest of Fiji. A damaging heavy swell warning remains in force for Fiji. Severe tropical cyclone Evan, category 4, was located near 16.5 south, 178.0 east, or about 50 kilometers northeast of Yasawa Irara and about 140 kilometers west of Lambasa and about 150 kilometers northeast of Nandi at 8:30 this morning. The cyclone is moving southwest at about 22 kilometers per hour. Close to its center, the cyclone is expected to have average winds of up to 185 kilometers per hour with momentary gusts to 270 kilometers per hour. On this track, the cyclone is expected to be located about 160 kilometers south-southwest of Yasawa Irara, or about 70 kilometers west-southwest of Nandi at 9 p.m. tonight, and 305 kilometers south-southwest of Yasawa Irara, or 195 kilometers southwest of Nandi, or about 195 kilometers west of Kantavu at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Destructive winds may begin several hours before the cyclone center passes overhead or nearby. For Yasawa and Mamanuca group and western parts of Viti Levu and nearby smaller islands, expect very destructive hurricane force winds with average speeds up to 185 kilometers per hour and momentary gusts to 270 kilometers per hour. Heavy rain with squally thunderstorms. Flooding, including sea flooding of low-lying coastal areas, damaging heavy swells. For the Mboa province, the interior of Viti Levu, expect destructive storm force winds with average speeds to 110 kilometers per hour and momentary gusts to 150 kilometers. Periods of heavy rain with squally thunderstorms. Flooding, including sea flooding of low-lying coastal areas, damaging heavy swells. For Dikumbia, Tavyuni, the rest of Vanua Levu and nearby smaller islands, Northern Lau and Lomai Viti group, the rest of Viti Levu and nearby smaller islands, Kandavu, Benga, Vatulele and nearby smaller islands, damaging gale force winds with average speeds up to 80 kilometers per hour and momentary gusts to 110 kilometers per hour. Periods of heavy rain with squally thunderstorms, flooding of low-lying areas. Damaging heavy swells with sea flooding of low-lying coastal areas. For the rest of Fiji, strong winds with average speeds to 55 kilometers per hour and momentary gusts to 85 kilometers per hour. Occasional rain, heavy at times and squally thunderstorms, flooding including sea flooding of low-lying coastal areas. The following information is provided especially for mariners. Hurricane force winds and phenomenal seas near the cyclone center. Storm force winds within 50 nautical miles of center and very high seas. Gale force winds and high seas to about 90 nautical miles from center. Elsewhere, strong winds and rough to very rough seas, heavy swells. Now we also have information coming in from Nandraki weather, which says the Yasawa and Mamanuca groups and western Viti Levu will bear the full brunt of TC Evan today, with winds likely to reach hurricane force. It says this is an extremely dangerous cyclone and all steps to protect life and property should be taken. Winds are likely to be destructive with strong, solidly built houses at risk of damage. The winds won't peak until later this evening. If you have any doubt about the integrity of your home, seek shelter in an approved evacuation center now. The center of the cyclone is expected to pass close enough to the Yasawas and Mamanucas today to allow the eye to pass directly over the islands. Winds in excess of 200 kilometers per hour are possible over the Yasawa and Mamanucas and western Viti Levu later. Those in the maritime and coastal regions from Lautoka to Nandi, including Denarau, should take note of the expected close proximity of the eye to these locations and prepare accordingly. Storm surges of over 4 meters are likely, with significant sea flooding likely later today along the north and western Viti Levu, especially with high tide around 9:30 p.m. Periods of heavy rain with local flash flooding expected, rivers rising and river flooding possible this evening in Nandi with high tide. Conditions will remain hazardous over Vanua Levu with flooding likely as rain continues. Take care when moving outside. Suva can expect squally winds gusting to 85 kilometers per hour at times, periods of rain becoming heavier around midday and early afternoon. Local flash flooding likely later today. Severe tropical cyclone Evan changed direction late last night and will now pass between the Yasawas and Nandi. As a result, the Western Division will be battered by gale-force winds and heavy rain. Christopher Chand caught up with the Nandi Weather Office in the last hour.
Winds have started to pick up in Nandi as Evan makes its way to the west. The Nandi Weather Office says there will be widespread damage as a result of its new path.
Changed its path, but as it did, it's now coming into, and it's going to affect most of the centers in the Western Division. That's most of the towns from Rakiraki all the way to Nandi.
People have been advised to stay indoors.
Anticipating severe damage to infrastructure, particularly traditional buildings, homes, and of course agriculture and the topography of the land itself.
Wangai Delua says we shouldn't focus on what time the cyclone will affect different parts of the country, but to be ready.
We are sheltered right now as we speak, but as the cyclone center passes slightly to the west of Nandi, that's later on today, it's going to be well exposed to the winds of the hurricane. And that's when we're going to feel the full brunt of the cyclone for Nandi.
It's estimated the center of the cyclone will be at its closest to Nandi at around 3 o'clock this afternoon. Christopher Chand, FBC News.
People in the Yasawas are now feeling the full effects of Tropical Cyclone Evan. As we begin with our quick situation report, most villagers have left their homes and are now sheltering in the village halls, which are acting as evacuation centers. The roof has been blown off the Mbukama village school and of 2 homes in Tedi village. Mereseni Buidangi of Mbukama village says the winds are really strong and the island's been getting heavy rain for some hours now. As Tropical Cyclone Evan bears down on Fiji, the authorities are again issuing warnings for people to stay safe. Permanent Secretary Information Sharon Smith-Johns says if people know their location isn't safe, move to your nearest evacuation centre.
Now we're expecting Lautoka at around about 2 p.m. It'll the winds that have really picked up there, and then moving through to Nandi. Now that also includes Bar, Tavua, the Coral Coast down to Korolevu. These winds are going to be very destructive. We're asking people now to take shelter and to take this very seriously. We know that this is going to come over the Yasawas and the Mamanuthas, and everyone should be fully prepared and to take it seriously because it is going to pick up and get worse through the day. Through tonight, you'll see Benga and Kandavu. If you're on Benga and Kandavu, please start to consider, moving to a safe area later on today. For the Central Division, Navua, Suva, Nasori, the Rewa Delta, we've been advised of very heavy rains coming through this area later on today, and there will be flooding in low-lying areas. We're asking people now, if you live in those areas, not to wait, to move to higher ground or to go to one of the evacuation centres.
Electricity has been shut down in the Northern Division for safety reasons, while some places in the north are also without water supply. There are more than 3,500 people in different evacuation centres around the north. Lambasa businessman Charanjit Singh says they have no access to radio broadcast or television because there is no power and they can't get any warnings on the cyclone. Lambasa town was closed by the military and police last night.
We have, as forecasted, we have got strong winds and which is gusting around, I think it would be about 100 nautical miles an hour. We also have showers that come to it on a quite regular basis. And this all has been happening from last night, from almost 11 o'clock of last night. And it's still continuing the same pattern. And we just don't know until when this would last.
Gale force winds are now being felt over most of Viti Levu. People in Raki Raki say they have never seen winds this strong, and many are worried about their safety. There is also a power outage in Raki Raki. Ba and Tavwa are also reporting strong winds and heavy rain. Gale force winds are also being felt in Overlau, with the Provincial Administrator Lomai Viti, Kelepi Kumunawai, saying they have asked people to prepare for the worst as winds have picked up. Gale force winds are now hitting the Suva coastline as well, and trees are swaying. There's been some minor damage, but this didn't deter people from trying to see for themselves what Evan can do. FBC News saw workers are returning home as winds picked up and heavy rain started.
It's very heavy winds blowing and heavy rain. Because of the wet weather, we were unable to work. Are you going home now? Yeah.
This weather is bringing in a lot of rain and strong winds. We should be prepared for this weather.
The Suva coastline is not a safe place to be at this time, as waves are smashing onto the seawall and even washing ashore. Some families came out to see the waves at this popular picnic spot at Laudala Bay, something the authorities advise against.
The weather is going bad. The wind is blowing very fast. Sky very go fast. Yeah, I'm walking here.
But the sea, rough.
Yeah, going rough.
Now, the government has issued a directive that all civil servants are to stay home until further notice. PS in the Prime Minister's office, Colonel P.O. Tikonduandua, has confirmed that the security forces are on standby should there be any emergency. But for all other civil servants, they are not to report to work until further notice. And the military will be deployed as and when there is need for rehabilitation. Now, that's your special weather update for this hour. We'll be back with more coverage in our 6 p.m. news bulletin. However, our 6 radio stations will bring you updates on the weather situation every hour. Stay with us and stay safe.